I spent 17 years teaching economic history at Brown University before I walked away from tenure to build a small farm in rural Vermont, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the distance between civilization and chaos is far thinner than most Americans believed. In October of 1929, when the stock market collapsed and erased fortunes overnight, my grandfather was a young man working in a Chicago meatpacking plant. He watched grown men weep in the streets as their life savings evaporated, watched neighborhoods transform into Hoovervilles where families lived in cardboard boxes at the edges of the city, watched the very fabric of trust that holds a society together begin to unravel. By 1932, 1 in 4 American workers had no employment, and as the Library of Congress documents, thousands of citizens roamed the country in boxcars searching for work that did not exist, while banks failed and hunger spread across a nation that had believed itself invincible. That collapse taught my grandfather something that he passed down to me on his deathbed, a lesson I ignored for decades while I lived comfortably in academic circles, a lesson that haunts me now as I watch our supply chains fracture and our political systems strain under pressure that feels disturbingly familiar. He told me that the men who survived the Depression were not the ones with the most money or the biggest stockpiles, but the ones who understood a simple truth that I am going to share with you today. A truth that experienced preppers follow but rarely speak aloud because, in times of crisis, knowledge itself becomes the most dangerous and valuable currency you can possess. Before we continue, I need you to stay with me through this entire presentation, because what I am about to reveal builds upon itself in ways that will only make sense if you see the complete picture. And I want you to comment below and tell me where you are watching this from, what city and country, because the principles I am teaching today apply differently depending on your geography, your population density, and your regional vulnerabilities. The modern prepper community, which has grown substantially since the supply chain disruptions of 2020 and the ongoing geopolitical instability, documented by organizations like Zeneta in their 2025 Global Risk Assessment, operates on a code that outsiders rarely comprehend. These are not the caricatures you see in television shows, running around in camouflage and building underground bunkers out of paranoia. The serious practitioners, the ones who have studied historical collapses from the Bering crisis of the 1890s to the trade collapse of 2008, understand that preparedness is not about fear but about acknowledging mathematical realities that our institutions prefer to ignore. When the World Economic Forum reports that 56% of chief economists expect weaker global conditions in 2025, and when supply chain experts document that geopolitical unrest has created unprecedented freight cost, volatility, and production disruption, we are not talking about theoretical risks. We are discussing observable patterns that have preceded every major societal disruption in recorded history. And the first rule that separates those who endure from those who perish has nothing to do with how much food you store or how many guns you own. The rule of silent preparedness emerged from hard lessons learned during the Vietnam War, when the United States military developed what they called Operational Security, or OPSEC, in response to Operation Purple Dragon conducted between 1966 and 1967. Military analysts discovered that enemy forces were obtaining sensitive information about American troop movements, supply schedules, and strategic planning not through sophisticated espionage, but through the collection and analysis of small, seemingly insignificant pieces of information that soldiers and support personnel shared without realizing the cumulative intelligence value. As the Defense Contract Management Agency documented in their historical analysis, this phenomenon proved so critical to mission success that President Ronald Reagan made OPSEC a government-wide requirement in 1988 through National Security Decision Directive 298, and in 2021 the White House elevated it further with National Security Presidential Memorandum 28, moving responsibility to the federal level and requiring all executive branch agencies to implement comprehensive OPSEC programs. The core insight, the lesson that applies directly to civilian preparedness, is that in environments of scarcity and desperation, information about resources becomes more dangerous than the resources themselves. During the Great Depression, as documented by the University of Washington's research on everyday life in that era, communities sometimes turned on families known to have stored food or maintained savings, and the social fabric that normally protects property rights and personal security deteriorated rapidly when hunger and desperation spread. The prepper who broadcasts his preparedness, who tells neighbors about his stockpile or posts photographs of his supplies on social media, who discusses his plans openly at work or in community settings, has committed a fundamental error that no amount of physical security can compensate for, because he has painted a target on his family that will become visible the moment systems fail and desperate people begin looking for solutions to their immediate survival needs. This is not cynicism speaking, but historical pattern recognition, and the distinction matters greatly. I am not suggesting that all people are inherently evil or that community bonds have no value, topics we will explore in depth when we discuss later rules. What I am stating based on economic modeling and behavioral analysis from crisis situations ranging from the Argentinian collapse of 1890 through the hyperinflation events of Weimar Germany to more recent disruptions, is that human behavior changes predictably when people face immediate threats to their children's survival. The rational actor who respects property rights and social contracts during times of abundance can transform rapidly when watching a child go hungry, and preparedness visible to others creates what military strategists call an asymmetric vulnerability. You have spent months or years building resilience while your unprepared neighbor has not, and in the crucial early days of a supply disruption or economic collapse, that neighbor knows exactly where resources exist. The prepared family practicing proper OPSEC remains invisible during this dangerous transition period, neither confirming nor denying their status, maintaining the gray man profile that allows them to navigate crisis without becoming a target. This means no conversations about preparedness with casual acquaintances, no visible indicators like solar panels or water storage systems observable from the street, no participation in online prepper forums using identifiable information, and perhaps most difficult for many Americans raised on values of openness and community sharing, no impulse to help everyone who asks, because that generosity, however morally commendable, can exhaust your resources and attract additional attention that compounds your security problems exponentially. The second principle, what experienced survivalists call the rule of sustainable independence, addresses the fundamental flaw in how most people conceptualize preparedness when they first begin taking these matters seriously. I watched this pattern repeatedly during my years teaching economics, this tendency to think in terms of stockpiles rather than systems, to calculate how many cans of beans provide how many calories for how many days rather than asking the deeper question of how to create renewable sources of nutrition that function indefinitely regardless of external supply chains. The American homesteading movement, which has experienced significant growth according to recent significance of self-sufficiency trends, understands intuitively what the doomsday prepper often misses. A basement full of freeze-dried food represents depleting capital, an asset that diminishes with each meal consumed and cannot be replenished once external systems fail, while a functioning garden producing heirloom vegetables, a small flock of chickens providing eggs and meat, a collection of fruit trees offering annual harvests, and the knowledge to preserve these foods through traditional methods represents productive capital that regenerates and even expands over time. The economics are identical to the distinction between spending down a trust fund and owning a profitable business, and anyone who has studied financial sustainability recognizes immediately which model survives generational timeframes. During the Great Depression, as documented in research on Iowa farming communities, rural families with productive land and agricultural knowledge suffered far less than urban populations entirely, dependent on wage labor and commercial food systems, precisely because farms continued generating value even when monetary systems seized and external trade collapsed. The sustainable homestead practicing techniques like composting to maintain soil health, rainwater harvesting to ensure water independence, and renewable energy production through solar or wind systems has built something qualitatively different from mere preparedness. They have constructed a lifestyle that functions whether the broader economy thrives or disintegrates. And this antifragile positioning provides security that no quantity of stored supplies can match, because the system itself adapts and continues operating through extended disruptions that would exhaust any finite stockpile regardless of its initial size. The third rule, which addresses a fundamental misunderstanding that pervades modern consumer culture, states simply that skills outweigh gear in every scenario that extends beyond the initial 72 hours of a crisis event. I have watched countless individuals spend thousands of dollars on the latest tactical equipment, high-end firearms, freeze-dried meal kits packaged in military-grade containers, and sophisticated communication devices, all while possessing virtually no practical knowledge of how to purify water without a filter, start a fire in wet conditions, identify edible plants in their region, treat an infected wound, or preserve meat without refrigeration. This represents a catastrophic inversion of priorities that becomes apparent the moment equipment fails, batteries die, or supplies run out, because unlike a water filtration system that can break or clog, unlike a GPS device that becomes useless when satellites go offline or electromagnetic pulses disrupt electronics, the knowledge encoded in your neural pathways travels with you indefinitely and requires no maintenance, no replacement parts, and no external power source. The American frontier, which our ancestors settled between the late 18th and early 20th centuries, was conquered not by men with the most advanced technology available in Boston or Philadelphia, but by individuals who possessed practical competencies that enabled them to construct shelter from available materials, navigate by celestial observation, trap game animals, tan hides for clothing, forge basic metal tools, and diagnose illness using symptoms and treatment protocols passed down through generations. When I discuss traditional medicine and what historians somewhat dismissively call leechcraft, I am referring to a body of empirical knowledge that sustained human populations for millennia before pharmaceutical corporations existed. And while I would never suggest that modern antibiotics lack value or that we should abandon scientific medicine entirely, the historical record documented by institutions like Frontiers in Plant Science demonstrates that herbal preparations used by Egyptians around 1500 BC and later refined by Greek and Roman practitioners showed genuine therapeutic effectiveness for numerous conditions. During the Black Death in medieval Europe, plant-based preparation known as Four Thieves vinegar, which combined vinegar with herbs like garlic, rosemary, and sage, appeared to provide some protective benefit to those who applied it. While Native American populations used the carnivorous plant Sarracenia purpurea to treat smallpox with sufficient success that multiple U.S. Army surgeons and the botanist Charles Millspaugh documented its effectiveness in 1892. The anti-malarial compound quinine, extracted from cinchona tree bark and used by Quechua people in Peru for centuries before Spanish Jesuits brought it to Europe in the 16th century, remained the primary treatment for malaria until artemisinin was isolated from Chinese traditional medicine in 1972 by Dr. You Tu, who won a Nobel Prize for rediscovering what Chinese practitioners had known for thousands of years. This pattern repeats throughout medical history, revealing that traditional plant-based treatments for fever reduction, wound healing, infection control, and pain management often contain legitimate therapeutic compounds that modern science has subsequently validated, and the prepared individual who studies these historical remedies, who learns to identify medicinal plants in his local ecosystem, who understands the proper preparation and dosage of herbs like yarrow for wound treatment, elderberry for immune support, willow bark for pain relief, and raw honey as an antibacterial agent, possesses a medical capacity that survives any disruption to pharmaceutical supply chains and can be shared, taught, and passed to future generations without requiring any industrial infrastructure whatsoever. The fourth rule concerns what military intelligence analysts call situational awareness, but which I prefer to describe as the development of local intelligence, because the word intelligence captures both the information-gathering aspect and the analytical interpretation component that transforms raw data into actionable understanding. Most Americans, including many who consider themselves prepared, possess remarkably little detailed knowledge about the specific geographical, social, and infrastructural realities that define vulnerability in their immediate region. They could not tell you whether their municipal water supply relies on a single treatment facility or distributed sources, whether their electrical grid connects to regional transmission systems that make them vulnerable to cascading failures, what percentage of food available in local stores travels more than 500 miles before reaching shelves, which neighborhoods in their city have the highest crime rates, and how those patterns shift during economic stress, what the local unemployment rate stood at during the 2008 recession, and which industries suffered the most severe contractions, or what natural disasters have historically affected their area, and with what frequency. This ignorance creates strategic blindness that can prove fatal during rapidly evolving crisis situations, because the family that evacuates east during a hurricane when historical pattern analysis shows that storms in their region consistently track northward after landfall, or the individual who relies on a well without understanding that local water tables drop 20 feet during summer droughts, or the person who stores a year's supply of food in a basement that floods every spring, has allowed preventable ignorance to undermine whatever other preparations they have made. The development of local intelligence requires systematic, ongoing observation and research into multiple domains simultaneously. You must understand your area's weather patterns in detail, not just average temperatures but historical extremes, typical precipitation levels, wind patterns, and the specific indicators that precede severe weather events. You need to know your region's crime statistics, not just current numbers but historical trends, and how those trends correlate with economic indicators like unemployment rates, housing foreclosures, and business closures. You should comprehend the supply chain vulnerabilities that affect your community, identifying which critical goods come from distant sources, which local businesses depend on just-in-time inventory systems that collapse during transportation disruptions, and which resources exist locally that could substitute for imported goods during extended supply failures. You must study your area's political and social dynamics, understanding which community organizations possess real capacity for collective action during emergencies, which government agencies actually have resources and competence versus which exists primarily on paper, and which informal networks of mutual aid might activate when formal systems fail. This knowledge base, built slowly through deliberate investigation and continuous updating, functions as a force multiplier that amplifies the effectiveness of whatever physical preparations you have made, because the individual who understands his environment at this detailed level can make informed decisions while others fumble blindly through chaos, and that time advantage, that clarity advantage, that contextual advantage often determines who survives transitions that others do not. If you are finding value in this information, I need you to hit the like button right now because it helps this content reach other people who need to hear these truths. And make sure you subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so you do not miss the follow-up content where we go even deeper into practical implementation. Comment below and tell me where you are watching this from, what city and what country, because I want to understand the geographical distribution of people who are taking these matters seriously. And your comment also signals to the algorithm that this content matters and should be shown to more viewers who are searching for reality-based preparedness information rather than the fantasy scenarios promoted by most survival content creators. The fifth rule addresses what I consider the most neglected aspect of preparedness in contemporary American culture, which is the cultivation of psychological resilience and spiritual grounding, sufficient to maintain rational decision-making capacity and moral coherence under extreme stress. During my years teaching at Brown University, I conducted research into disaster psychology and the behavioral responses that individuals exhibit during catastrophic events, and the data reveals a disturbing pattern that most people refuse to acknowledge until they have experienced it personally. Approximately 90% of individuals exposed to sudden life-threatening situations freeze initially, exhibiting what researchers call normalcy bias, which is the cognitive phenomenon where the brain rejects information that contradicts its baseline assumptions about how the world functions. Studies documented by institutions like the National Center for Biotechnology Information show that psychological preparedness, which encompasses mental resilience, emotional regulation, and pre-crisis planning, significantly influences how effectively individuals respond to disasters. Yet most Americans spend hundreds of hours preparing physical supplies while investing zero time in mental conditioning or spiritual practices that would enable them to actually function when those supplies but become necessary. The historical record from every major American crisis, from the Civil War through the Great Depression to the 2008 financial collapse, demonstrates that moral decay accompanies material hardship, that theft increases, that violence escalates, that trust erodes, and that individuals face ethical decisions under pressure that they never imagined confronting during comfortable times. The person who has not thought carefully about where his ethical lines exist, who has not developed a spiritual or philosophical framework robust enough to provide guidance when social norms collapse, who has not practiced stress inoculation through gradually increasing exposure to discomfort and uncertainty, that person will make catastrophically poor decisions during actual crisis because the prefrontal cortex shuts down under extreme stress and primitive survival responses dominate unless you have trained alternative neural pathways through deliberate practice. This means regularly placing yourself in controlled, uncomfortable situations, whether through fasting to understand hunger, camping in bad weather to experience cold and wet conditions, practicing communication blackouts to simulate infrastructure failure, or engaging in rigorous physical training that pushes you past the point where your mind wants to quit. Because these experiences build the psychological calluses that prevent mental breakdown when genuine hardship arrives. It means developing a meditation practice, prayer routine, or philosophical study discipline that gives you access to internal stability independent of external circumstances. Because the individual who depends entirely on comfortable conditions for mental equilibrium will shatter psychologically when those conditions disappear, while the person who has cultivated what the Stoic philosophers called an inner citadel can maintain clarity regardless of what chaos erupts around him. It means having honest conversations with your family about worst-case scenarios, not to terrify them but to mentally rehearse responses so that when crisis arrives, you are executing a plan rather than improvising desperately. And it means accepting that survival situations may require you to make decisions that would be unthinkable during normal times. Decisions about resource allocation, about who receives help and who does not, about the use of force to protect your family. And if you have not reconciled yourself to these possibilities before they arrive, you will hesitate at moments when hesitation costs lives.